Who Gets to Decide? A liberty-based podcast that brings a little piece of sanity to a confused society drowning in a culture of craziness. And here is your host, Seth Martin.
Well, all right. What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Who Gets to Decide. This is episode 659. I'm Seth Martin, your host. Thank you for joining me this evening. Glad you're here and always happy you're listening. Well, a few months ago, there was a big release on the January 6th report from the FBI that said, among other things, that there were 274 either agents or confidential informants, otherwise plainclothes individuals that were on the property during January 6th. And so I wanted to talk about that today because I think it's important to know who you're dealing with when you're dealing with the federal government. Yes, in the Constitution, it says that citizens have the right to redress their government for grievances, right? But it always goes to the question of the law is what is being enforced. Okay, there's what's written down and then there's what's being enforced. For example, if the speed limit is 65 and everybody is driving 75 and nobody's getting pulled over, then the real speed limit is 75. And by the same token, if you have enshrined in your Constitution the right to redress your government for grievances, but the government doesn't allow you to do that, well, then you don't really have that right. Even though it's written down and we've all agreed to it and the states ratified it and all this kind of stuff, that's not really a right. And so I think it's important that, you know, we start to understand who we're dealing with when we're dealing with government, okay? We're dealing with people that have power, and their tool of preference is force, coercion, the police, the military, force, okay? And they don't really care. Maybe they care once you haul them into court and you spend $200,000 on a lawyer and you spend 6 months, you know, fighting this in and out of jail and things like that. Maybe you can make the government care. But I don't know, let's say you have a business to run or you have a job and you get arrested on J6 and you have a right, the government knows you have a right, but now you've got to go through some sort of legal process, some sort of due process in order to demonstrate that. Well, you might lose your job in the meantime, you might lose your family, cost associated with that. And it doesn't matter what's written down. I mean, I'm sure we've all seen the video of like somebody in a car who's sitting there with the window rolled up and the police officer is saying, get out of the car. I mean, yelling, get out of the car, get out of the car. And the person's like, I know my rights. I know my rights. How does that end? Well, it usually ends with the officer smashing in the window and dragging the person out of the car, thrusting them on the ground, maybe hitting them some and kicking them some, and then cuffing them up. The officer is shown to have violated the law. But in the meantime, you've been, you know, beat up, dragged out of your vehicle, your windows smashed in. You may have some physical injuries from the way the officer treated you. And now you got to go to court, you got to hire a lawyer. I mean, so this is kind of the problem with coercion. This is one of the reasons that, you know, your lawmaking authority should be limited to liberty and property. Okay? Everybody knows, for example, that, you know, you can't murder someone. Okay? Well, if you murder someone, that's you taking their liberty. And everybody knows you can't steal. And so these are like basic things that the law addresses. You know, your own personal property, which is your body, okay? And then anything your body uses to create something, to create value or to create wealth or whatever. You work your property and you plant a garden or whatever, and that garden's yours because you did it with your body. This is how the law is supposed to work. But what we got now is we've got millions of laws maybe on the books, certainly tens of thousands. And, this whole idea that, well, if you don't do anything wrong, you don't have anything to worry about. This is just not the case, okay? And so January 6th, for me, is one of these lessons in that kind of statement. Well, if you're not doing anything wrong, you don't have anything to worry about. And, I think with today's show, one of the things we're going to demonstrate is that, look, the government has its own interests. It has its own goals. And if the guy at the top, has a quota to get certain number of prosecutions, or if January 6th or something like January 6th becomes politically unpopular, and you got to show how tough your administration is by, throwing a bunch of people in jail, they don't care about your rights, okay? And so I just thought January 6th was such an instructive kind of thing for people that are liberty loving and understand how liberty works. Now, this first guy we're going to play is someone who does not understand, okay? He is someone who, this is an example of what I call the official narrative, the party line. We all get together and go, okay, this is what we're going to say, okay? Anytime there's a microphone put in front of your face, or there's a camera in front of your face, this is what you're going to say. And so this is an example of what the normies think happened. And if you're a normie, I apologize. I hope that doesn't offend you. But this is what the normies think happened on January 6th. So I'm going to play this, and I may stop it here and there, but I want to contrast this with what really happened on January 6th and why it's such a bad example of what America is capable of doing to its own people, its own liberty-loving, freedom-loving people. And this is why government should be as small as possible, okay? You cannot give government any power. Our government has probably 1,000 or 1,000,000 times too much power, okay? So you could cut their power, their budgets and everything by 1,000,000, and it might still be too big and too powerful for freedom to exist. And this is, so this is instructive. And another way it's instructive is when you take on the government, when you are challenging the government, especially with something as visible as something like January 6th, where you're at the Capitol, you're protesting and things like that, you have to understand there are laws on the books that you don't even think are against the law. Like if you were to ask somebody like on the street, like if you walk around with a camera and go, is it illegal to, sometime I'll just have to do this. I'll have to look up a bunch of laws that are on the books, federal laws. Okay. Those are the ones that are the worst, because the way federal laws are written is they're very broad and they're very vague. So essentially you can drive a truck through them. Okay. So, but this is what they do. So you have to understand who you're dealing with, and you cannot, you have to be careful not to embarrass the government, especially if you don't have any power. Okay. If you don't have any power and you embarrass the government, they are coming after you. Okay. And this is what happened to Trump in his first term. He embarrassed them and they came after him, and they thought they could get rid of him. And of course they miscalculated, but the government doesn't like to be embarrassed. It likes to have this air of being above the fray and being above all this bickering and fighting and haggling. And, we talk with very monotone, they're all about the appearance of freedom and the appearance of justice and the appearance of these high ideals that are necessary, I guess, to kind of perpetuate what we believe. They're used to kind of help us shape our belief. Not you and me don't use it, but the government officials, they use, this language to help manipulate us and help us feel like that, oh, you're free, Okay, yeah, you're in jail, but I mean, you're a free person. Come on. It's a very interesting kind of dynamic and dance that government officials do with the public. I mean, they have to maintain this air of consent. We're ruled by the consent of the governed. The governed is you. Okay, you're the governed. And so they're constantly kind of, molding and directing this whole consent thing to give the appearance of freedom and justice and things like this. And so this first guy we're going to listen to, he's an example of, what the narrative is all about. What is it they're trying to do, and why do they do it, right? And so this is essentially what we're all familiar with. So let's jump in here and listen real quick.
It's really important on this day in particular and every day to remember where we were on that moment on January 6th, 5 years ago, and what we saw with our own eyes. The president called people to DC. He aimed a violent mob at the Capitol, and then hundreds of people attacked the Capitol, destroyed property, threatened members of Congress, and attempted to stop the peaceful transfer of power. We all saw it with our own eyes, and yet there is an attempt to rewrite history, to recast that violent mob, over 1,000 of whom were convicted of crimes, although subsequently pardoned, to recast those people as the heroes in this story, even though we know that's not what happened, and to recast the members of the Capitol Police Force who bravely tried to protect members of Congress in the Capitol building, to recast members of Congress who worked through the night to complete their duty to ensure the peaceful transfer of power, and to recast the thousands of election officials, the public servants whose work has withstood scrutiny for 5 years now and who correctly determined what the outcome of that election was, and to recast them all as villains in this story. That's just not what happened, and the memory of that day and where we...
Okay, we got to stop right there because nobody is doing that. Nobody is recasting the Capitol Police as villains. Nobody's recasting anybody as villains. The thing that was at the core around January 6th is what riot, well, some people, not everybody there, but some people, maybe a third or something, 20% or something, were agitating. Now the question is, were they organically agitating, or were they riled up? Were they instigated? And these questions were just ignored. You're going to see in a minute, we're going to play some clips of Christopher Wray testifying, and the obfuscation, the lies of omission. These are all tactics that the government uses to keep from you what they're actually doing, what they actually do. This isn't just a bunch of free people that got spun up at the Capitol and decided to break a window. They were throwing tear gas at the people. And they had other people in the crowd going, let's take the Capitol and let's get inside. And you just can't get to the bottom of it. And this guy, he talks about there was plenty of opportunity to submit evidence and all this stuff. No, because they have the evidence. And if they don't want to release it, they just say national security. Look, I watched it live and I was uncomfortable. But do I think people need to go to jail for 4 years as a result of what they did at the Capitol? Not just no, but hell no. I mean, they went back and geofenced this whole thing. It's not like they arrested 1,000 people and put them on trial. They went back after everybody went home and back to where they lived. And the FBI went out and tracked them down and said, your phone shows that you were there. And we have you on video into the Capitol. Of course, there's a Capitol policeman welcoming them in. But the problem is what they did to these people is they said, we've got you on video doing X, Y, and Z, and that's 20 years. Or you could plead to, trespassing and spend 4 years in jail. And this is what the government does, okay? This is how they operate. They have these huge penalties on crimes that are barely crimes. Lying to, a federal official is a crime you can go to jail for. And they lie to each other, constantly. We're going to show it here in a minute how Christopher Wray just lies to Andy Biggs. Lies of omission, obfuscation. These are lies. In a court of law, you know something and you're not fully explaining what you know. That's a lie. That's called a lie of omission. And so contrast between the party line in the media, what everybody said January 6th was, and yes, it was ugly. And yes, it made you uncomfortable. But wow, did people get abused? And now you got this situation where Trump's trying to get a fund to help some of these people because there were people. Can you imagine you got a business to run and you find yourself mixed up in this thing, ensnared, and you can't run your business. You lose your business, and then you lose your house, and you get divorced, and it just goes on and on and on. This happened to some people as this all unfolded. And so it's not like there was police there and somebody's beating somebody up and the police grab the guy that's beating somebody up and they cuff him up and take him to jail right then and there. No, this is what they did is they geofenced this thing. They went back to figure out who was there. And then they went to identify these people on camera, figured out where they were in the Capitol, what they were doing. People were just abused in this process. And guys like this, I don't even know this guy's name, but what a freaking loser this guy is. This guy is basically a government official. He must be on the government payroll because this is only about 5 months ago, this interview. And he just completely reframes this whole subject about how the January 6ers were criminals and there's just been this horrible effort to recast the Capitol Police as villains, the politicians as villains, law enforcement on site as villains. No, nobody's doing that. Nobody's doing that. Nobody is doing that. And this just irritates me, the way these people frame stuff up. And here it is, more than 5 years later, and we're just now finding out that there were 274 FBI either agents, informants, or otherwise associated with the FBI in plain clothes. What were they doing there? What was their job? Why were they there? Where is the actual order that instructs them? Where's the paperwork that tells these 274 people that were there what they're supposed to be doing while they're there? Nothing. We got nothing on that. I'm going to play a clip in a minute where this lady kind of responds to Robbie Suave. And it's just such an irritating thing. I get this all the time from people where I'm trying to explain something to somebody and they just, oh, Seth, come on. You don't really believe that, do you? No, I don't believe it. I know it. Okay, I know that this is how it works. So, it's exasperating. But the reason I came back to January 6th is because there are people still talking like this guy that we're playing right now. And it's just infuriating. And they're just never going to give it up. Trump summoned them. He ordered everybody to go there, bust into the Capitol. He should be impeached. All these people should go to jail for 20 years. This is what people believe. And, the bigger thing for me is if people really believe that, you're sitting there thinking, I really believe that. Man, I don't take this the wrong way, but I just don't want to share a country with you. I don't want to live with people who are so easily snowed and so easily manipulated by government and politicians. Everybody needs to go back to school, really, and learn about how governments operate. That's really what needs to happen. And there's just so many people that are just naive. All right, let's continue this.
We're all of us as Americans, and how across the political spectrum, we were horrified by what we witnessed on that day.
It's remarkable because as you speak, we're looking at footage from that day, and it gives me chills as you lay out the sacrifice that police officers made. Some of them died as a result, taking their own lives due to the trauma they experienced. And it is 5 years on now. And I want to touch on that note you made about a rewriting of history.
This is just nitpicky, but how does this guy know that some police officer took his life because of trauma. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe he looked at what he did, what he took part in, or she, and said, and just couldn't live with themselves and decided to take their life. How does he know it's trauma? For the longest time, we heard about how there were Capitol Police that died on January 6th. And let me just be clear, nobody died on January 6th except for Ashley Babbitt. That was it. That was the only person that died, and she was shot in the head by a Capitol police officer who was never convicted. As far as I know, he was never even questioned about the event. I mean, that could have been, but as far as I know, there was never an investigation. Certainly there was nothing ever released to the public. And this woman just died. She died at the Capitol. She was a protester. There was nobody arrested with any guns. There were some people with knives, but there was nobody knifed at January 6th. So there were people that were arrested and were found to have knives, but nobody suffered any knife wounds. And the only person that suffered a gunshot wound is Ashley Babbitt. So I had to hear for months and months and months how police officers died at January 6th, just straight up lying on the news. And this goes for news. All right, let's continue here.
There are people alive today who weren't alive during 9/11 and have different views on its impact. Is there a danger now that the actual events of January 6th, as we witnessed them, as was captured on video, may actually be forgotten?
Yeah, not only forgotten, but completely rewritten in a way that is 180 degrees different from reality. It was a shameful moment in American history. It was a shameful moment in world history, and the world was horrified as they witnessed what was happening with regard to American democracy, as for the first time a sitting president was.
Nobody's rewriting history. The problem is we can't get to the history, okay? Nobody can write the history because nobody knows what happened. And the reason nobody knows what happened is because all the people in charge are lying about what happened. So history can't be rewritten. All we can do is speculate that it didn't go the way this guy's saying it went. And that's a big deal. Like in an open, free society, people have to be able to agree about what happened. Otherwise, you get conflict. Let's say somebody runs into my house, takes my keys, and they start running toward my car, and I chase them down, and I hit them in the face and knock them out and restrain them until the police get here. And then the police show up, they kind of separate you, and they ask you what happened, and they ask the other person what happened. Let's say the other person says, I don't know what happened. This guy just hit me in the face and knocked me out. What's important about that interaction, the hitting in the face to subdue the guy, is secondary to the fact that the guy came into my house, took my keys, and was about to take my car. Okay, that's an important piece of information in that story. And there's important pieces of information in this story too. But we can't get to it because all the officials that are supposed to be, testifying in front of Congress are lying to Congress, and yet they walk around free when that's on the books as a law. You're not supposed to lie to Congress. You're not supposed to lie to federal FBI agents. The problem with these laws is they're not administered, uniformly. Laws are supposed to be universal. If you murder somebody, there's a prescription for that, right? And by the same token, if you break the law in the government, you shouldn't get a pass unless you work for the government, unless you work in this building that says government or FBI or whatever. No, that's not how a free society operates. And yet that is how we operate, okay? It's one of the reasons I was so glad that Thomas Massie and Ro Khanna pursued the Epstein files in the way that they did. They forced a vote and they passed a law. Because normally what happens is they'll subpoena, and what happens is whoever it is, they just ignore it. And then when the administration is over with, all those subpoenas are just wiped out. They're erased, like they never even got issued. And so, the fact that they passed a law means that, the next attorney general, in this case, there's no appetite to prosecute the attorney general, for not releasing the remaining Epstein files. But we could, the very next administration that we have, there could be a tremendous appetite for that. In fact, maybe the next candidate runs on that and says, I will compel the attorney general to release, my attorney general will release all the Epstein files. And if they don't, then I'll expect their resignation on my desk. And so that law is forever until Congress repeals it. So that's one of the things I like about what they did there. The point of the law is it's supposed to be applied universally. And we simply just do not have that. I mean, look, presidents murder people and kill people and do all kinds of stuff all the time. They are absolutely above the law as you and I know it, okay? All right, let's continue.
Involved in an attempt to prevent the peaceful transfer of power. Over those 5 years, the work of election officials that has been confirmed time and time again by about 100 courts has been confirmed. We know who won the 2020 election. We know who won the 2024 election as well, although the peaceful transfer of power was not attacked in that election. And the outcomes were correct. Over that 5 years, there have been so many who've had an opportunity to present evidence that that election was stolen. And yet, every single time when they were sued for defamation and could have proven that what they were saying was truthful, they failed to do so. They often conceded liability. Fox News settled for nearly $800 million a defamation lawsuit. So we know what really happened on that day. And yet there is a danger in forgetting that. And if we forget it or we rewrite that history, there's always the potential for that same kind of thing to happen again, for a lie by a losing candidate to lead thousands or millions of his supporters to attempt to undermine the peaceful transfer of power.
Yeah, and the footage.
Okay, that is simply untrue. Okay, now it did take a while for the evidence to come out. And of course, Biden was in, basically a lot of the evidence didn't come out until Biden was almost out of office. So what this guy's saying is not true. In Arizona, there's lots of evidence that's been presented. And some people are probably going to go to jail. Hundreds, and not just tens of thousands of votes either in Arizona, like more than 100 were shown to be manipulated. Georgia, same thing. So there's at least a couple of states. And there's a lot of evidence in Pennsylvania. There's a lot of evidence in, I think it's either Minnesota or Michigan. So no, that it's just not true. There is evidence that the absentee ballot system was completely adulterated. Okay, so it's not true that there's just no evidence. It's just that the officials in charge of all this stuff just dragged their ass for 5 years before they were compelled to turn it over. I mean, that's what happened. And so this, and people aren't tracking it for the whole time. They're looking at it 6 months out or a year out and going, yeah, if there was evidence, you better believe that politician would be in court fighting it. But because of the way the government works, and because they're not so forthcoming with evidence, not unless you're an enemy of the state. Look, if you're an enemy of the state, they'll create evidence. Okay? I mean, if you're someone like Trump, they'll just create something, to ensnare you in. But if you're friendly to the ruling class or the ruling power, and you're a Democrat and all your friends are Democrats and they're all looking out for each other, they'll protect you. Okay? And that's exactly what happened. This guy's just not even, granted this is 5 months old, but I think this has been out for maybe more than a year now, that Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, there's lots of evidence out there now. Now, what are you going to do? You can't go back and, Biden's already out of office at this point. I think they should put a footnote by his name as president of the United States, the 46th president of the United States, footnote, asterisk with a footnote, illegally elected or something like that. That's what I think they should do. But of course, they're not going to do that. But anyway, this guy, this is the narrative. Okay, though, this is what I wanted to point out, is this is what you're up against when you're dealing with these narratives. They're very entrenched, and these people are friends with the media and the Fox News crowd and people like that. All right, let's jump into this interview with Christopher Wray by Andy Biggs in the House Judiciary Committee, because this is where we're going to see, obfuscation, lying, things like that. And make no mistake, Christopher Wray is not going to serve any time. He's not going to get fined. Nothing is going to happen to Christopher Wray, okay? Because he is inside the system. These are friends of his are all over the FBI, and they've got no appetite to pursue any of this.
Reported that more than 40 FBI personnel, agents, or contractors were in the crowd on January 6th. Is that number accurate?
I don't know if that number is accurate.
Former Capitol Police Chief Stephen Sun reportedly has asserted that the protest crowd was filled with federal agents. Are you aware of his assertion?
I am not.
Would you agree with him that it was filled with federal agents on January 6th?
I would really have to see more closely exactly what he said and get the full context to be able to evaluate it.
How many agents were actually agents or human resources were present in the Capitol complex and vicinity on January 6th?
Well, again, it's going to get confusing because it depends on when we deployed and responded to the breach that occurred. Obviously,
how many were under
federal agents?
Sure. Yeah, you're talking, and you and I both know what we're talking different things here. And please don't distract here, because we're focusing on those who were there in an undercover capacity on January 6th. How many were there?
Again, I'm not sure that I can give you that number as I sit here. I'm not sure there were undercover agents on scene.
I find that kind of a remarkable statement, Director. At this point, you don't know whether there were undercover federal agents, FBI agents in the crowd or in the Capitol.
Look, this guy is lying. It's either that or he's just completely incompetent. He has no... Look, if the FBI was there and they're in plain clothes, they're there undercover, okay? The FBI is always dressed in like a suit, or they have a windbreaker on that says FBI. So if they were there for like crowd control or something like that, they would be in some sort of marked clothing. The storyline is, oh, well, we had all these FBI agents responding to the Capitol for protection because of the breach. But if that were true, they would have shown up in, FBI windbreakers or something. They would have been identified, okay? These people were in plain clothes, okay? In fact, there's videos online that you can find where they're changing out of clothes and sticking them in a backpack and putting on Trump paraphernalia, okay? So they can blend in to the scene. So this is just all theater, really, okay? And he is totally, obfuscating the facts here. He's talking about responding to the breach. And the thing is, now we've got Kash Patel saying, the FBI doesn't do that. So there's another lie, okay? Look, the bottom line is the government was up to something. We don't know exactly what that something is because they won't tell us. Even though we have FOIA and we have all these ways of getting information, they're simply saying national security or sources and methods, or they have some BS reason for why they can't give us the information that we should be due in an open and free society. And that's unacceptable. All right, let's continue with Christopher Wray's testimony in the House Judiciary Committee hearing.
Crowd or in the Capitol on January 6th?
I say that because I want to be very careful. There have been a number of court filings related to some of these topics, and I want to make sure that I stick within what's in.
I understand that, but I thought I heard you say you didn't know whether there were FBI agents or informants or human sources in the Capitol or in the vicinity on January 6th. Did I misunderstand you? I thought that's what you said.
Well, I referred very specifically to undercover agents.
Yeah. And so are you acknowledging then there were undercover agents?
As I sit here right now, I do not believe there were undercover agents on scene.
Any
FBI
assets?
agents.
Did you have any assets present that day in the crowd?
When it comes to what you're calling assets or what we would call confidential human sources, that's a place where, again, I want to be careful, much as I said in response to an earlier question.
Okay, that's just more lying. Okay, there's a lawsuit. He wants to make sure that he's in line with what the lawsuit says and all this other mess. Look, it's a simple question. Were employees or sources, employees of the FBI or sources for the FBI, were they present on the Capitol grounds on January 6th? Yes or no? It's that simple. And of course, now we know the answer is, of course, yes. And the problem is now we're, 10 years later or something like that, 6 or 8 years later? A lot of people have already shaped their belief on this because there was so much lying initially about what had happened there. Once a lie is out there and you're telling it over and over and over again, and you're trying to shape the narrative, so many people have kind of posed the question, well, weren't there FBI agents there? Now we're at the point where, okay, yes, there were FBI agents there. Now we're trying to get people to understand that FBI involves people in entrapment all the time. So were they there to entrap people? Look, there is a piece of paper within the FBI that says what those people were there to do, okay? The government writes everything down because that's what they do. Why can't we get that piece of paper? I'll tell you why. Because it's not in their interest to let you know what it was they were doing. They don't want, that's the whole sources and methods thing. Oh, well, if we tell you what you were doing, then we'll be revealing to you what we do. Hello? Yes, that's what we want to know. We want to know if we're free people or not, or if we have a Gestapo in America. That's what we're trying to find out, dude. Are you some sort of freaking idiot? To me, I just would lose my shit if I was on this Judiciary Committee and I'm having to talk to this guy. Certainly somebody needs to pursue throwing his ass in jail for some period of time, because these people are obstructionists. Charge him with that, obstruction of justice. This is clearly obstructionist. If I was answering questions like this to the FBI, they would charge me with obstruction of justice. Do we live in a free society, or do we have government officials that basically act like the Gestapo, the way the Gestapo operated in Germany pre-World War II? That's what we're trying to find out. And I think it's the latter. I think we actually live in a society where the FBI is more afraid of you and me than they are terrorists or murderers or, bombers or whatever. People that you and I would be afraid of, the FBI is not afraid of them. They're not worried about those people. They're worried about you and me. We're the ones that are unsafe, okay? We're the ones that are a risk to them. We're the ones that are a threat. And that's the problem, man. That is the problem in a nutshell, is I'm not a threat, okay? I'm not a violent person. I don't use force. I'm going to use force to protect my property, but I don't go out and force my way through the world every day. No, I cooperate with people. I hand over money voluntarily for services and things like that. I'm not a dangerous person. This guy, Christopher Wray, is a dangerous person. He's the enemy. He's the criminal, okay? And all these people on January 6th, they're just average people that got caught up in a situation. Not all of them, but the vast majority of 95% of them were just average people out there walking around, hooting and hollering, being part of what was going on, being part of history or whatever. And we're just never going to get rid of this narrative, I don't think. I think it's just always going to be with us because it was told for so long, and people went to jail and Trump had to pardon them. And now he's trying to get a fund to help. Some of these people lost everything, man, everything, because our government treated them like criminals. That is horrible. That's worse than horrible. All right, I want to switch to the Hill, because This is a conversation between Robbie Suave of The Hill and some lady, and I don't know her name. I apologize. But this is one of those examples where she's like, come on, you don't believe that, do you? You know, one of these things. I get this all the time, and it is so maddening. People are ignorant, okay? When it comes to their government and their freedom and all this kind of stuff, people are ignorant. They just are. And if you're going to have these conversations with people, you're just going to have to lean in on these types of things. And this is a great example of that.
President Trump was furious over the weekend after a bombshell report came to light on Saturday, seemingly alleging the FBI had hundreds of plainclothes agents in the crowd during the January 6th Capitol riot. The president posted to Truth Social, quote, "It was just revealed that the FBI had secretly placed, against all rules, regulations, and protocols and standards, 274 FBI agents into the crowd just prior to and during the January 6th hoax. This is different from what Director Christopher Wray stated over and over again." That's right, is it? Now turns out FBI agents were at and in the January 6th protest, probably acting as agitators and insurrectionists, but certainly not as law enforcement officials. I want to know who each and every one of these so-called agents are and what they were up to on that now historic day. Trump ended it with a jab at his former FBI director, quote, Christopher Wray, the then director of the FBI, has some major explaining to do. That's two in a row. Comey and Wray got caught lying with our great country at stake.
Okay. My question is, Trump, what are you doing about it? Why haven't you directed your Justice Department to go deal with this? This is a clear case of lying. Trump has really screwed up his presidency, okay? He is so now wrapped around the axle with this conflict with Iran that he should have never started, okay? Look, the reason the guy won, okay, just to be clear, I didn't vote for him the first time. And the reason I didn't is basically showing up now, is we don't know what the guy believes in, right? We know he's easily manipulated. We know he doesn't understand government. We know he doesn't really know who he's dealing with because he keeps getting impeached and he doesn't understand the way things work. As far as I can tell, he launched into office because he could make a better deal. Now, for me personally, that's not good enough. Now, I did vote for him in 2020 because Kamala Harris was just so awful, and the whole COVID experience, the free speech, you know, the Twitter files, just all of it was just too dangerous for me to have Democrats anywhere near the Oval Office. And I think I've said this before, Trump, I think, is dangerous for people outside of the United States. I don't necessarily see him as dangerous for me personally or my family. I see him as more dangerous for the global community. And to be honest, that's secondary to me. I think this war is horrible, and I wish he wasn't in it. If he had managed to stay away from this and fend off Netanyahu and stay out of the war, stay out of conflict with Iran, he could be focused on prosecuting Christopher Wray, prosecuting Obama, or at least people high up in Obama's administration for all the Russiagate stuff where they changed the intelligence report in like late December of 2019. Tulsi Gabbard finally, somebody on her team finally found it. And then she referred it to the Justice Department for criminal prosecution. But man, there were so many bad things that happened under the Democrats. I just can't vote for Kamala Harris. There's no way in hell. But, you know, if Trump wasn't so distracted with Iran, he could be going after these people and putting a stop to this. You throw a couple of these people in jail and you'll never have these problems again. They'll be on the straight and narrow because nobody wants to go to jail. And once you demonstrate that it's easy to prosecute you if you get up in front of Congress and lie, that shit'll stop, okay? Because these people aren't made for jail and they don't want to go to jail. But right now they just think they can get away with it, and they are getting away with it. Not a single person under the Trump administration has been prosecuted. That's just a fact.
Okay, this is a little bit complicated. I'll be honest, and I don't necessarily believe that the agents were all there sent as crowd control afterward. FBI agents get sent for crowd control. That's the work of a garden variety law enforcement, where they should have sent the National Guard. Makes no sense. Maybe it's the case. Maybe they were stupidly sent in for that role. That does seem like a failure. What I think is that the FBI doesn't want to admit that it did have agents embedded in the crowds of the gathered January 6ers. This would not be surprising at all. The protesters were largely consistent of patriot groups and militia groups and the Proud Boys. Those organizations have FBI agents deeply embedded at them at all levels, at all times. In fact, the leader of the Proud Boys himself was an informant for the FBI. The FBI is very good at infiltrating right-wing organizations and then inducing the people in them to commit crimes so that they can then arrest them.
Oh,
But that's true. That happens. That absolutely.
You're gonna make somebody commit a crime. No, if you're a bad person, Robbie, I'm sorry to tell you, this is simple. My mom told me this when I was young. You're just a bad person. Nobody can induce me to commit a crime, no matter what organization. Nobody can pay me enough to commit a crime, is what I'm saying.
Okay.
This lady has no idea what kind of laws are on the books. I've had this discussion with the show before, but there's a famous book called 3 Felonies a Day, and it basically
that I'll say yes to that. So if you're a bad person, you do a bad crime. If you're a good person, you won't do it.
For instance, in the Gretchen Whitmer fake kidnapping, the FBI paid participants in that scheme to continue organizing it, to induce the other people involved in it, to try to buy weapons to do it, so that then when they go to charge them, they have evidence. They can say, here's where you tried to purchase weapons. They never would have gotten to that level unless the FBI had been instructing them to keep going. They do this, by the way.
All right, everybody. Well, I had a problem with my mic, and so I'm switched to mics, and I'm going to finish up the show with this mic. Hopefully, the audio seems somewhat uniform, but if it's not, I guess it just won't be. All right, so what I was saying is that essentially people that just are naive about government and run around and scoff at the rest of us when we're trying to talk about these things, these people are annoying. And what they need to do is they need to understand a little bit about the way governments work and quit judging us for trying to call attention to the organized criminality that is our federal government. And it's just very annoying. I get this all the time, and I'm so tired of it. I get it from family members. I get it from people that, generally what I try to do is I try to ask questions. What's the reporting you've heard on January 6th? Do you believe Christopher Wray? I mean, have you seen Christopher Wray's testimony? Do you believe what he said? And what do you make? How do you square the fact that Christopher Wray said there wasn't really any FBI agents there, but now we have a report from the FBI itself saying there was 274 agents there? How do you deal with that? To me, things just don't smell right. Like, I just call it the bullshit detector. My bullshit detector just sniffs out. And not only that, but you can usually just kind of err on the side of governments pretty much doing things that are not aligned with liberty. You can pretty much just assume that and make some educated guess as to what happened. That's typically what I do. All right, let's jump into the next clip.
They should go to Cuba because Trump literally is saying that the FBI secretly placed people, like, show the proof. He just randomly calls out statements, and we're supposed to just believe Kash Patel, who doesn't even know how to say a firm sentence.
Well, if we're not believing Kash Patel was the one saying they were sent there as crowd control. So you don't believe Kash Patel.
I don't believe any of them. I feel like they're uncoordinated. I feel like they're not having a conversation about what the plan is and, hey, we're going to stick to this plan.
Well, that
also,
I agree with.
Hakeem.
Just get the proof, Seth. I mean, where's the proof? And this is part of the problem, right? Part of the problem is they just don't share it. No, you can't have it. And Congress is more or less powerless to make them do anything. I mean, they can subpoena them, but if the Justice Department is not going to prosecute people for lying, I mean, I don't know. Do y'all remember, when Steve Bannon didn't show up to testify, they went after him and prosecuted him. The Democrats, say what you will about them, but at least they use the law to try to get what they want. The Republicans just, there's no political will to do this, so let's just move on. That's kind of their attitude. But no, this has to be, these problems have to be fixed. And the only way you can fix them is to have a perp walk. And this lady, she's just, bless her heart, she just doesn't know what she's talking about. Where's the proof? Trump should just bring the proof. Like oh, it's just right here. Here's the proof. No, the proof resides in these agencies, and they're not sharing it. And that's part of the problem.
Jeffries was on MSNBC just flat out said what most people are thinking. Donald Trump is lying to the American people in the events of January 6th. He can't justify the fact that he helped to incite a mob of violent individuals who attacked the Capitol as part of an effort to reverse and undermine the results of the 2020 election. That's what he's saying. This is what this is all about.
Well, the agents were there. I mean, the question is, were they there, as I suspect? I mean, maybe they could have been in multiple roles, and some of them were there, again, embedded in the crowd. And then the question becomes, were they instigating people? Because it is easier, again, to arrest people once the FBI has instigated them to commit some crime. Or were they there as a response, as crowd control, which is baffling to me, but maybe the case. That's what Kash Patel is saying he was told. But I don't necessarily trust him to do a good enough job here to well, that's what they're telling you to cover themselves. Can you actually get to the bottom of that? You're right that they're not on the same page about it. Trump, Patel, Wray.
And we just can't rewrite history. And we also just can't, we know that Trump surrounds himself with loyalists. So the fact that somebody doesn't fall in line with his message.
Look, some of the stuff she's saying is true. You know, Trump does lie a lot, and he does surround himself with loyalists. But it doesn't change the fact that there were FBI agents there. And Robbie Suave hits the nail right on the head. If there were FBI agents there, why were they there? What were they doing? What were their orders? Look, these are command and control kind of organizations. They're very hierarchical. These guys don't go do stuff without some orders, okay? And those orders are generally written down. They're in some sort of report, or somebody gave an order, okay? And the question is, what were they ordered to do? And it doesn't matter that Trump lies, okay, about that, because he's not the one telling us about that. The FBI themselves are telling us, oh yeah, we were there. We had 274 agents there. There's like a Inspector General report or whatever. You know, this stuff has come out. It's not just Trump saying it. He was saying it at one point without any evidence, but so was I. You know, I mean, I was saying it because I've seen video with people that have badges taking off clothes and putting on Trump paraphernalia and then embedding themselves in the crowd. I've seen videos of that. And it's not AI, okay? AI wasn't even a thing really back in 2020 so much. So, you know, they were there. The question is, what were they doing there? And why do we have people on video breaking things? And why are the people, this is another interesting thing about January 6th. Some of the people we do have on video, not everybody, but some of the people they do have on video doing things like breaking windows and pushing against doors and kind of forcing their way in and stuff. None of those people were prosecuted. Okay. The only people that are prosecuted are people that were wandering around in the Capitol. Maybe they crawled through a window, but they don't have any video of them crawling through a window, and they don't have any video of them forcing themselves through a door. The only people that they have videos of doing things like that were not prosecuted, have not been identified. Okay, well, what do you make of that? Well, what that tells me is they're most likely FBI agents. Okay, that's what I glean from that. And if you don't glean that conclusion from that, then you're of a different mindset. Okay, I'm not saying you're delusional. You believe something different about the way government behaves, and that's fine. But don't scoff at me when I'm telling you what is real. Okay, what is really happening. And just because you don't believe it doesn't mean that it ain't real. Okay. So if you're listening and you're doing that, stop doing that, because it's very annoying to people. All right. This is the last clip that I have coming up here. And it's Robbie Suave really talking about how easy it is to break the law. Like what he's really saying is there are just so many laws that are broadly written, and they're just the sheer number of them. You know, they're vague and they're broadly written, and there's a lot of them. And this is where the whole 3 felonies a day comes in. So let's listen to this.
I'm very curious about this. I would like to know a lot more about when the agents arrived, what was the thinking of that.
What will that change, though? Like, violent people attack the Capitol and hurt and kill people.
Well, if they were
and we're going after our
suggested to do
Congress
it.
leaders.
You know who Ray Epps is? You're probably unfamiliar with this.
No, I don't. Tell me.
So there was a guy the day before. He was a participant in the events, but the day before.
Oh, I think
he's on camera saying, you know what we're gonna do tomorrow? We're not gonna stop. We're gonna go into the cat. We're gonna go in. And the people around him go, no, we're not breaking any laws. No. And then the question is, are there figures like him who are inciting the crowd to actually take unlawful actions? Now, what I witnessed when I was there was that it seemed like a spontaneous riot breaking out. I mean, I've seen crowds turn, and it seemed to me like that was the behavior.
You were on the Capitol?
Yeah. I lived right. I went when I found out there was going to be. I was a journalist, not as a supporter of the president. I went to
cover it. Okay,
to
got
cover
it.
Yeah,
Understood.
So I watched it happen. It was horrifying. I got pepper sprayed in the face. You couldn't there's a cloud of it coming my way. I was like, how bad can this be?
So even if
Pretty
people,
bad.
let's say, were induced, in your words, by agents, does it still absolve them of the crime? You feel like, the pepper spray.
I'm not saying it absolves them of the crime. I'm just saying I wish our law enforcement would spend less time trying to trick people into committing crimes so that they can pad their conviction rates. You know what I mean?
Okay, we can agree on that.
I'm not saying it gets them out of their responsibility. It's like, wouldn't it be great if we had a government that was going around trying to convict people? I mean, this goes to the conversation we're having about Comey's behavior and Trump's behavior and everyone, is that it is very easy. People don't understand unless they've paid very close, granular attention to the criminal justice system, as I have in my capacity as a reporter, as a libertarian reporter who writes for a magazine that focuses on civil liberties, the power of the criminal justice system, the law enforcement system, to get you is really because people naively say, well, if you did nothing wrong, you're fine. You've done things wrong you can't even conceive of. So that's just the general lesson.
This is the point of 3 felonies a day. You are breaking laws you don't even know you're breaking. Okay? So it is easy for the government to get you if they want to. Okay? You become a target, and then it's easy to find a crime to convict you of, to charge you with, and then convict you and ruin your life. And this is I can't remember the guy that founded the KGB in the Soviet Union, but that's what he said. He said, show me the man and I'll show you a crime. I'll find a crime. Just show me who you want to pin it on and I'll make it happen. And there's a famous line in Atlas Shrugged. And if you haven't listened to or read Atlas Shrugged, I highly recommend it. And basically he says, well, Mr. Reardon, that's why we create these laws, is so that people can break them. We create them so you'll break them, so that we'll then have leverage over you. That's why we do it. And this is not just, that's a fictional book, but it's not just fiction. It actually happens in real life. And this is part of what I try to explain to people, is that what the 7th or 8th grade idea of your government, the United States of America, that you learn in 7th and 8th grade is not the reality of what we have. It's just not. It's not even close. And to me, this January 6th thing was so emblematic of that. And it just goes to show you that we have 2 different thoughts on this. We have 2 different mindsets about what the role of government is in a free society. And this conversation just demonstrates that. The fact that you had that lawyer earlier talking about the approved narrative and how it's criminal how people are rewriting history. This is kind of the fundamental problem of our country, is we have people who believe that we have this 7th or 8th grade version of America, and then we have other people that don't believe it at all, and to the point where we know it's costing us freedom. And I think that's kind of where the rubber meets the road. That's the difference. That's really the divide in America. When you really analyze it, that's really it. Okay. It's really not Republicans and Democrats, oppressed versus the oppressors, the rich versus the poor. You've got large swaths in America, mostly poorer Americans, that are just thrashed by the criminal justice system. And these people, they get out of the car and they bump the police officer, and the police officer, that's assault of a police officer. And next thing you know, they've got a felony. And it's like, that ruins your life. And so we have an aggressive system. And I mean, from the top all the way down to the bottom, from the federal level all the way down to your local police. We have a very aggressive system against kind of average people, and maybe not aggressive enough on violent people. Like, we ought to focus on violence. Really, that's the part we ought to be policing. We shouldn't have cops sitting on the side of the road trying to catch people going 10 miles an hour over the speed limit so that they can collect, $275 from you. We shouldn't have that. That's not what we want in America. There needs to be a conversation about, what do I want my local police doing? I don't want them hiding behind a bush trying to get me going 10 miles an hour over the speed limit. I want them catching criminals, investigating criminals, and putting them behind bars. And when I say criminals, I'm talking about violent crimes, crimes against people's body, murder, rape, child abuse, assault with a deadly weapon, these types of things, okay? Not, where I do like that and I brush up against you, the police officer, and you claim assault, and now you just give me a felony. And now I got to go spend $25,000 on a lawyer to defend myself so I can get my due process, which I'm guaranteed by the Constitution. This is ridiculous, okay? This is ridiculous that people have to spend their hard-earned money to get this justice. And it all could be improved if we just had cops that were less aggressive. Now, look, I got a good friend of mine. We disagree on this. He goes, I want cops out there roughing people up, and I want them doing this. But I guarantee it just takes one time where you have a run-in where you're completely innocent and you've been completely ensnared by the justice system, and you are writing checks, you are spending time in court, maybe you lose your job because you had to spend time in jail. Just one interaction like that, and you will change your tune, because it is that disruptive to your life. All right, with that, I'm going to wrap up. Thanks for listening. Thanks for coming in. Appreciate you guys coming in and listening. Share the show. We'll have another episode of Who Gets to Decide. This January 6th thing, though, it was just too much for me. I just had to say something about it. Now that we know there was almost 275 FBI agents at the Capitol on January 6th. What were they doing there? I don't know, because our government won't tell us. But, you be the judge. All right? All right, everybody, I'm out. Peace. Take care.